Good morning. Good morning. I am pleased to welcome each and every one of you to Hospital Medicine 16 here in San Diego. Welcome to the Year of the Hospitalist. Thank you for being here. We are here in full force with the largest gathering of hospitalists than ever before. Over the next few days, you will experience the best hospital medicine conference and annual meeting with spectacular content that is sure to please. I would like to acknowledge the annual meeting committee who worked tirelessly over the past year to plan and put together this fantastic gathering. The annual meeting committee's work is supported generously by the Society of Hospital Medicine, specifically Brittany Montemore and Teresa Jones, who we are indebted to for their commitment and contributions. There are, in addition, over 35 SHM staff who've contributed significantly to putting this all together. So thank you. We must also thank the 185 plus faculty and speakers who are here, lending their expertise and sharing their knowledge with all of us. Thank you as well to the sponsors and exhibitors who are supporting this gathering. Now, let us turn our attention to some logistics so we can get the most out of the next few days. I would like to remind everyone here to stay connected. The Hospital Medicine app is available at the address listed here. With this app, you will have ready access to schedules, session presentations, and RIV abstracts. For those using social media, including Twitter, please remember to use hashtag HospMed16. As you are reviewing the annual meeting content and schedule, I would like to take just a moment to highlight some of the content at this meeting. In addition to spectacular plenary speakers, including Dr. Murthy, who will be introduced shortly, we continue the very strong tradition of showcasing terrific clinical content. And this year, we are offering several new tracks, including a track focused on health IT for hospitalists, a track dedicated to co-management and perioperative medicine, and a track focused on post-acute care. I would also like to mention that for the first time, we're hosting a panel on the important topic of work-life balance. Many of our more popular features from past meetings make a return this week, including the Young Hospitalist track, a track devoted to the doctor-patient relationship, content for our pediatrics colleagues, and fantastic content in the quality track, the research track, and the practice management track. A few things to take note of as you plan your schedule are listed here. Remember that lunch is today, starting at 11:30 a.m. in the exhibit halls, just upstairs. At 4:30 today, special interest groups are meeting. There's something here for everyone. Groups will be meeting with a variety of interests, and those are listed in your program guide and Hospital Medicine app. Following the special interest groups is the RIV reception, starting at 5:30 p.m. today, also in the exhibit hall. For those who are looking to stay fit, there's a 5K fun run tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. This will be followed by a morning of celebration, specifically the best of RIV starting at 7:45, And following this, the annual SHM awards will be given out and SHM fellows will be inducted. The morning session will be rounded out by the president's and CEO addresses all tomorrow morning. So, thank you for being here at Hospital Medicine 16. We can now enjoy the best meeting and the largest gathering of hospitalists over the next few days. Please now join me in welcoming leaders of the Society of Hospital Medicine, Drs. Larry Wellickson, John Nelson, Bob Wachter, and Wynn Whitcomb, as we begin the Year of the Hospitalist, the 20th anniversary of the term hospitalist. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and I wanted to thank Melissa and her entire committee and the staff at SHM for staging this meeting. I wish all of you could have a minute to sit up here and see how awesome it looks to look out on 4,000 hospitalists. We're going to talk in a minute about when we could have fit this entire meeting into a very small telephone booth back a number of years ago. Let me just take a moment to just introduce who's sitting to my left. Right next to me is Bob Wachter. Bob's current job is he is the acting chair of the Department of Internal Medicine at the University of California at San Francisco. Next to him is Wynn Whitcomb, who's the chief medical officer of Remedy. And at my far left is John Nelson, who's a principal in Nelson Flores Consulting. But that's not the reason that we're all up here. Oh, and by the way, I'm Larry Wellickson. I'm the CEO of the Society of Hospital Medicine. What we wanted to do was the staff and the leadership thought that it was an appropriate time at 20 years in to this still new and vibrant specialty to call out in a very dramatic fashion the Year of the Hospitalist. And we thought to open this very historic meeting, that's the largest meeting we have ever had, that it would be good to take a little bit of a journey back to 1996. That's the year when Hillary was just the president's wife. And that I think few of us really could have imagined the totality of the specialty that you have all helped to create. And so we're going to have, you notice we're sitting, if this was up to me, we'd be sitting in beach chairs, but we're sitting like we're sitting around a living room having a conversation that we'd like you to listen in on. So I'd like to start things off by just turning to Bob and ask him, what the heck were you thinking about in 1996 before any of this was even evident?
First of all, welcome everybody. It's thrilling to be here, and it is true that the view is amazing. I would be thinking in my mind to say that this audience is huge and classy, but I don't want to go there.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Great. It's the best. Thinking back to 1996, one of the things that's so striking is none of us are that old, meaning we were really, really young in 1996. And I think that was, except for Larry, and I think that was partly why we were successful. We didn't know what we didn't know, and we had pretty big dreams, and we had this sense that that they might work out. The way this all happened, at least my own small portion of it, was in 1995. I had been running the residency program at UCSF. A new chairman of the Department of Medicine came in at UCSF, and he asked me to run the medical service. And his name is Lee Goldman. He's now the dean at Columbia. And he said, I don't know what I want you to create, but I want to figure out a way of organizing a medical service that improves what today we would call value. We actually didn't use that word back then, but improves quality, improves safety, cuts costs. And he said, and go out and do it. And basically he said, I have your back, which to me was an inspiring bit of leadership that I've tried to learn from in my career. Try to find good people, inspire them, push them a little bit, give them the support, and then kind of let them do what they're going to do, and that's what he did with me. And I began snooping around to try to figure out a new model for inpatient care that would improve value. And I began hearing, I put my ears to the train tracks, began hearing about different places that were trying these different models. There was an article in a throwaway that talked about an inpatient physician. And then one of our very good clinician educators at the VA in San Francisco took a job at a local community hospital to be the inpatient manager. And I called him and I said, what the hell is that? And he explained it to me. And a little light bulb went off and I said, I think this is the future. I wrote an article in our house staff newsletter, Circulation 150, and I said, here's a new field that seems to be emerging, and I called it hospitalists. I actually don't remember where the word came from, but I called it hospitalists. A bunch of people came up to me and said, oh, I read your article, which is interesting. When it's in the house staff newsletter, they say, I read your article. When it's in a major journal, they say, I saw your article, because they have not actually read it. And as my friend said, you should write that up and send it off somewhere. Wrote it up, sent it to the New England Journal. They published it. And pretty soon I started getting phone calls from a few different directions. One was hospitals saying, oh, we want to do this thing. And in the article, I used the term hospitals for the first time and described why I thought this new model of having a separate inpatient generalist made sense, and made clear that I didn't know for sure, we didn't know for sure it was the right model, but that it made sense in all sorts of grounds and that ultimately it should be tested. And at the same time, we were developing a version of it at UCSF. So I began getting calls from hospitals saying, we want to do this, how do we do this? I had no idea how to do it, but I said, okay, I'll come out and help. But probably the most important phone call I got was from that guy, and maybe John could pick it up and talk about it from his perspective.
So backing up a little, there's a guy ahead of me in my residency training in the 1980s, this guy named Chuck Wilson, and he goes across town after completing residency and becomes an inpatient doctor at the private non-teaching hospital across town, taking care of patients referred from only one primary care doc. Within a few weeks, though, his patient volume exploded. Everyone else, or a lot of other doctors, wanted to refer to him also. So my senior year as a resident, he calls me. He says, John, what are you doing next year? I said, I don't know. And he said, why don't you, come join me? So I did, and began as a hospitalist in the 80s and thinking, this is not, nobody does this. This is, I better figure out something I should, could really do with my career.
What did you call yourself, by the way? What was the job called?
Inpatient internal medicine.
Inpatient
internist. And so I felt like, this is kind of strange, and I better find a real job after a while. And so I didn't ever find a real job. Instead, I started finding peers who were doing the same thing at other places. So by about 1995, I developed a habit of getting the American Hospital Association guide, which was a printed book. I didn't have the internet yet. And I would look through that book and call hospitals around the country saying, I hear you have an internist that doesn't have an office practice there. And occasionally they'd say, oh yeah, you're right. You must be talking about Dr. So-and-so. And so I began finding these people and I'd take their contact information and I'd say, look, we should probably get together and trade ideas. Because I want to know how many patients you see and how much you make and how you do this, address this aspect of your practice, what schedule you use and so forth. So then Bob's article appeared, and as he was just mentioning, I saw his article in the New England Journal, and both Wynn and I called him shortly after. I first tried calling the second author of that article, thinking he would be more available, more likely to talk to me. The second author was Lee Goldman, who is sort of a pillar in medicine, but that didn't register with me. He wasn't able to take my call at the time, so I put the phone down, right away dialed back to ask for Bob, and his secretary says, sure, hang on a second. And Bob picks up and talks to me for a half hour, 45 minutes, and I think, this guy, he must not have that much to do. And we had a great conversation, and then the other pivotal call was I get a page one day, the hospital operator says, there's a Dr. Whitcomb calling you, long distance, this number, call back. So I called back, and Wynn and I had another energizing, terrific conversation.
Before we go to Wynn, can I make two comments about that? First of all, one of the lessons from this is I've learned that one of the key ingredients for success is inquisitiveness. And think about this. John is a community physician working his tail off, seeing patients, but this turns out to be one of his habits, was when he read something interesting or came across an idea, it was a habit of his to call the author of an article. I mean, who does that? I mean, but I think there's an important life lesson there. Then if you hear about what he actually did, he pulled the American Hospital Association listing of every hospital and called up the CEO or the CMO and said, and as he described this to me at dinner last night. I don't know if you've seen the movie Spotlight, but it's the same technique they use to find pedophile priests.
I think they got it from me.
So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, so I was just trying to follow in my dad's footsteps. My dad was an old school internist, and he did everything. And actually, when I was a resident, my dad took a month off because he had a small MI, so I filled in for his practice, and I was running the EKG machine and spinning urines and going to the nursing home and doing house calls, and I was like, this is really cool. This is what I'm signing up for. So fast forward 2 years, I'm in primary care practice in this very corporate health system-owned new primary care practice, and essentially my boss is the receptionist who would come into my office every 7 or 10 minutes saying, well, we've booked 3 more today for you, and I'm sitting there with my dictaphone trying to make decisions on patient care, which is a radical difference, of course, from what I learned in residency. So I'm thinking, well, I'm kind of a failure at this. I've got to find something else to do. And it's all about not growing up, of course. So this was early 94, and Mercy Hospital in Springfield, Mass., the hospital across town, the sort of backwater community hospital, had actually set up a hospitalist program that didn't have that name. Board-certified internist on-site 24/7 starting July of 1993. So I joined that practice in July of 94, and it was a complete disaster. I mean, it was... I came in, and the medical director who recruited me, I said, well, where's Kevin? This was the 4th of July. I think we had about 84 patients between 3 of us. And they said, oh, Kevin's last day was yesterday. It's like, okay. So a few months later, I finally accepted the leadership role of the Mercy Inpatient Medicine Service. And I did that for, fast forward 10 years. But in the early days, I had the same thoughts you had, John. It's like, I'm going to get a real job someday, and grow up. But then it started to occur to me, like, this actually may be a legitimate way to make a living and to take care of patients. Patients really seem to like this. And then my next thought was, we need a club. We need to, figure out from each other and learn from each other. And I was sure there was some club that already existed out there, and I was wrong. There was no club. And sort of as I can do really well, I procrastinated on this idea that we need to start a club until a warm August day when I walked out to my mailbox. I remember everything about my walk out to the mailbox. I remember the lawn that I hadn't mowed recently, and I remember the street and the temperature and the humidity. And I opened the mailbox, and I looked at the front of the New England Journal, and I see the emerging role of hospitalists in the American healthcare system, and I just about lost it. I mean, I just couldn't believe what I was reading, and so it ignited something in me. And although I didn't do much about it for another 2 months because I needed the backing of somebody like you had, Lee Goldman backing you. My hospitalist program was still in a shambles, I thought, so it would have been a little disingenuous for me to start a national organization until I had a new boss. And I met him the day I got back from my honeymoon in early October of '96, and he said, Win, go for it. So my long patient list that I had every morning, I sort of put that aside, and I ran up to my office, and I started basically calling all these people that were in these throwaway journals that had been doing this work that I collected over the last couple of years. And soon after that, John Nelson was on the cover of today's Internist at the bedside, and it was describing your practice. And I look at this article, and it says, and he wants to start a national organization for hospitalists. And I was like, wow, do I call him, or do I just try to start a competing organization? I decided to call you. And about that same time, I called Bob, and we had one of these crazy, far-reaching conversations that I don't have that kind of conversation with too many people, but with you, it was one of these, all right, you start the national organization with John. I'm going to start the research arm and the education arm of this new field, and we'll keep in touch. So,
no, it was extraordinary in its hubris, if you think about it, because let's see, I was 38. You guys were how old?
22.
Yeah, right.
I'm a year younger than you, I think.
Early to mid-30s. And we had this sense that this was going to be big. The analogy was emergency medicine. We sort of said, all right, a field that's a generalist field organized around a site of care. There's a need for it. It was very clear. We knew there'd be a lot of political blowback, but we basically kind of put our nickel down and said, this is going to be big. What does it need? And we said, well, it needs conferences and a textbook and curricula and a society. And then we sort of divvied up the world and said, you guys do the society. And our partnership turned out to be extraordinarily important, I think, and it's been a metaphor for the field because it was very clear that having an academic be part of this had some utility in terms of legitimization and the training space and the research and all that. But it was very clear to me that having real doctors be central to this was also absolutely crucial. And we knew in building a society that it had to be something that embraced both of those domains or it wouldn't work.
I mean, part of the incredible shell game that we played in the early days, or faking it, was to connect with a top-shelf academic medical center and create the appearance of legitimacy until we were able to fill out that. And we're still working on that, by the way. But and we also connected with the American College of Physicians in the early days as well. We called all the medical societies and said, so how do you start a medical organization? And the AMA was like, well, I don't know. It's been 200 years since we started. Nobody.
I tried to get the local county medical society where I live to be our office and borrow their secretary, but that didn't really work out.
Well,
so we had a partnership with the ACP early on, and the three of us talked about what's the next step for the organization. And I agreed to take a sabbatical from practice in Florida for 2 months, move. My wife and I went up to Philadelphia where the ACP office is, and I sort of tried to help get things rolling. But the big activity during that 2 months for me was to get ready for the first strategic planning retreat for our organization. And I wanted to find somebody to facilitate it. So I had this office in that ACP building, but working beside me were a lot of ACP staff who I didn't know very well. I was not working directly with them. But one woman heard me making all these phone calls all around. I'd find somebody who does strategic planning or some meeting facilitator, and I'd call, and how much do you charge, and what would you think about what we have planned? And so one day this woman who worked at the ACP pops her head in the door and says, I've been hearing you make all these phone calls. You know, there's a guy you might want to call. His name's Larry Wellickson. And I said, yeah, well, what's he do? And so she said, yeah, he's pretty smart. And so I called him, and he was he had the best price. So that put him right at the
It's no longer true.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's got somehow since I left the board, he's getting paid more. But so that's how we got Larry. I said, yeah, could you come facilitate our first?
Let me just before we segue to Larry, let me tell two quick stories about the first meeting of what essentially became the society was a CME meeting I held in San Francisco at the Holiday Inn on Van Ness Avenue. This place was a dump. I mean, an incredible dump. And I thought we'd get 50 people. We got about 180 or so, maybe close to 200 people. And it was sort of an interesting crowd. There were sort of people who looked like all of us who were there, mostly clinicians interested in this thing. And then there were some really fancy people in very fancy suits, and those were the venture capitalists trying to figure out whether to invest in this field. And then there were a bunch of homeless people who came in off the street. So it was a very interesting crowd. And after the end of about 9 hours of CME, and people were exhausted, the three of us got up in front and says, does anybody want to stay and talk about a new society? Everybody stayed. And then we said, well, if we're going to do a society, we need money, I think. and people started handing up $20 bills, including the homeless people. I mean, they were so, they were charter members. They were so inspired by this. And that's basically, that was really the first meeting of the society. The second thing I recall.
Who was at that meeting? Anybody here at that meeting?
At that meeting?
Here we go. All right, very
cool,
good.
Cool.
Excellent.
The second thing, that's very cool.
1997, by the way.
That was 1997. The second recollection I have was then the first real meeting of the society, I think was here, right, in San Diego.
Yeah.
At the hotel.
At the Hyatt.
It was maybe a pre-meeting of an ACP meeting. And John was in charge of the negotiations with the American College of Physicians about what our role was going to be. Because as John said, ACP embraced us, which was kind of nice, because they realized that they had not embraced emergency medicine a generation earlier, and emergency medicine left internal medicine, became its own thing. So they decided, after a lot of back and forth internally, to kind of welcome us. They allowed us to use their office space in Philly. But we were trying to figure out what our role in ACP was going to be. And so John is in front of about 200 hospitalists in his sort of incredibly charming, folksy way, says, well, the ACP kind of wanted this relationship where they're here and we're there. And he said, but I was making the argument that we should be they're here and we're here, like we're co-equals. And I'm sitting there saying, but they have 150,000 members and we have like 112. But somehow, somehow he got away with this. He sort of made this idea that we did not want to be subservient to them. We wanted to be on equal footing, and somehow they bought it because I think they came to believe that this was going to grow to be big and important, and they wanted it to be part of internal medicine. Anyway, then Larry Wellickson entered the scene.
So I feel a little bit like John Kasich, so thank you very much. But I'm now going to tell you what
does that make the rest of us?
Hold up your hands.
You can. I pick a win for Marco Rubio. He just says that. John does negotiate with me. I'm on the American College of Physicians board, and I've just sold a venture capital-backed company, and I've got a little bit of free time, and therefore I was sort of a bargain, and I was intrigued by this. And I show up to do the first strategic planning in 1998, and this is the most eclectic, disorganized group of people. They're very interested, they're very well-meaning, but they've gotten sort of a tiger by the tail. You know, I remember at that meeting, their vision of hospital medicine is maybe we'd replace 50% of the family medicine trained doctors and 25% of the internists, and and I'm drawing these big diagrams that we're going to be doing home health care and managing all sorts of things. And we do get organized, and I get invited back the next year in 1999 to find out that they haven't done one thing that I told them to do the year before. And I sort of say to them, this is going to be really big, and you need to go out and get some. We had a part-time staff in the ACP office, and once John, went back to his practice, and I left that second strategic planning and went with my wife to Hawaii. And then we got into this little bit of discussion about, would I come for a couple of months to NIP headquarters in Philadelphia. And what we eventually decided was, since they didn't at that time know if they had any money or had any assets, it was a very interesting negotiation on how they would compensate me, because they didn't know if they could compensate me. So we sort of basically
talked about stock options, but we didn't have any.
I've been waiting for the IPO. But.
So I think that my first arrangement was that I said, I'll come back for 3 months intermittently to Philadelphia, and we'll figure out what you started out with, and if I make it any bigger, then you'll give me part of whatever I made bigger. And that was in January of 2000, and I've never left. And it was an exquisite group of young people. In my entire career, I've never been sort of in something where I'm the oldest person in the room and sort of viewed a little bit like the adult supervision. And it was just a altruistic group of people who just believed that that they could change the world, that they saw something new and vibrant and weren't really sure what was around the corner. And I will tell you that one of the incredible exciting things is that 20 years later, all of you and your colleagues who are not here continue to project that one of the hallmarks has been this kind of thing that we've never been too put off by the fact we don't have all the answers. And that we just keep feeling that if we keep sort of calling people and investigating and reaching out to other people, that eventually not only will the questions arise, but the solutions will arise. And so it's been quite a journey. So so we started out being NAIP, and I don't know whether John and Wynn, you want to tell people how you came up with that name, and and how we got to be Society of Hospital Medicine.
So it's a dangerous question. I'm a master of the long form anecdotes. My stories go too long, but the short version of that story is we wanted to avoid using the word hospitalist in the name because initially there was a lot of controversy. There's still some, I suppose, around the idea of hospitalists in the healthcare system. But back then there was a good bit of controversy, and we thought we'd be more successful at creating a big tent if we didn't have the word hospitalist in the name of the organization. So my default was to rely on the inpatient physician, which is how I described my work for a long time. And I think we had talked about this for a long time and kind of thought that made sense. I think that the name change was a good idea, though, later down the road.
The name change was we started to think that, first of all, we wanted to be an organization that included much more than physicians. And that I think it was probably the only time in the history of SHM that Bob and I wanted something to happen and we didn't get what we wanted. I think you may not remember this, but Bob and I were thinking the American Society of Hospitalists. And we thought that the place, and some very bright people, I think Mark Williams and Jean Huddleston. Jean Huddleston was on the board, and she was from Mayo, and Mayo had already set up a department of hospital medicine. And Mark may have set up a department of hospital medicine at Emory, and they came to the board meeting and they said, oh no, we should be like the Society of Hospital Medicine. And a lot of the people on the board said, what the heck is hospital medicine? That sounds like anesthesia and pathology and radiology. But I think it was just an incredibly clairvoyant kind of way to do that, because as hospital medicine has evolved now to include certainly nurse practitioners and PAs and pharmacists and as well as surgeons and obstetricians and neurologists, that it's actually perfect that the Society of Hospital Medicine is what we became. But
it was actually, I remember that conversation quite well, and it was clearly the right call, and I was on the wrong side of it. And it was partly because I had pride of ownership of the term hospitalist, and people had to shut me up and say, that's just not the right call. And it's another important lesson is sometimes, people get stuck on an idea and you have to smack them around a little bit and make sure that you're doing the right thing for the organization. Hospital medicine was clearly the right call because it was much more inclusive and said it's really about the practice and the aspiration of what we're trying to do for patients than any particular subspecies here. And I think, and it was about the right timing too. I think had we named it hospitalist or hospital medicine too early, that word and the whole movement there was so much controversy around it that it probably would have been more harmful than helpful.
So, so that's sort of, we, as you know, it's sort of nice of you to drop in because the four of us could talk about this for a long, long time. And, there is, stay tuned, come back in 20 years when we'll be in our wheelchairs telling you how this all started. What I wanted to do is maybe just ask if any of the charter members who are in the audience, if you wanted to stand for just a minute so we can sort of see if there's some charter members that are still here. And I wanted to, like I said, I don't want to bring this to a halt, but I wanted to sort of flash forward, to where we are today. I think the most exciting thing is that we, and I mean not the four of us up here, but the larger we, sort of the papal we, you know, have created something, and I don't believe we're even at halftime yet. But, you know, according to the American Hospital Association, there are 52,000 hospitalists in the United States. You know, that we now have people that started as hospitalists who are CEOs of hospitals, who are chief medical officers of health insurance companies and health-related companies and hospitals. As you'll see in a couple minutes, the Surgeon General's a hospitalist, the highest-ranking physician at CMS. Pat Conway is a hospitalist. You know, we are the fastest-growing medical specialty that has ever existed in American medicine. You know, and even if you look at things that are happening now, like alternative payment models and the bundles and BPCI, nobody participates in BPCI as much as hospitalists do. And we are the leading edge as the system is being reconfigured. And if you look at performance improvement and patient safety, we're the only medical association that's ever won the NQF and the Joint Commission's Eisenberg Award, and our center has funded more than 500 hospitals, projects over $10 million. And actually, these three guys and the charter members and all of you have fundamentally created a new specialty that didn't have a fellowship or any additional training. I mean, and convinced the ABIM and the ABFM to create an MOC credential around it. I mean, it's incredibly breathtaking, and we aren't clear now where we're going next. But we all know we're heading out into the post-acute space, and we're heading into palliative care and out to perioperative care, and you know, light years and frontiers beyond. It's an absolutely awesome place, and I think, you know, as Bob and John and Wynn have tried to recall, that things that people see that they think have always been there, or they think that are inevitable. You know, of course there would have been 52,000 hospitalists and 4,000 people sitting in one room, but it wasn't inevitable. And what's great about this country, and especially about where we are now, and
are you going to make America great again? Is that what
I
you're saying?
am going to make America great.
It's going to be huge.
I want a contested content. I will be there. But I think it just shows you that, as Bob said, to be curious, to not put limits, to don't feel that you're being presumptuous, you know, and that this is an incredible thing. And I think that I got here well after you know, the seeds had been planted, and many of you had decided to make this career. But I think the specialty and the patients we all treat owe a great debt of gratitude to the curiosity and the chutzpah of these three guys. So join me in a round of applause. So just to put a topper on the year of the hospitalist, I wanted to call to the stage our 15,000th member. And I wanted to call her up to the stage now, and I want to call Dr. Glauber to come up and join us. And it's an amazing accomplishment to get to our 15,000th member. So congratulations. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. And you notice that she's much younger than me, and the future of healthcare. So with that, I wanted to move on to the next part of the program. I have just an unbelievable job, and one of the things that makes my job so enjoyable is the people that I get to work with. And I'm going to call to the stage our current president, Bob Harrington. And Bob is the first family medicine trained physician to lead the Society of Hospital Medicine. Bob had a career after medical school and residency. He went in the military and came out of the military and became a hospitalist in North Carolina. And then he soon joined a hospital management company where he quickly rose to be their chief medical officer. And he's been involved in the locum tenens side of hospital medicine and is now involved in trying to make some sense out of the post-acute care side of hospital medicine. We're both proud alumni of Temple University Medical School, which we like to think of as the UCSF of the East Coast. And I want to bring Bob to the stage to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Society of Hospital Medicine, I want to welcome you to beautiful San Diego. For those of you who live here, I know you're probably grateful for the rain that we're getting yesterday and today. For those of us who are visiting, it appears that we will get a reprieve tomorrow, so hopefully things will get back to normal here over the course of the next 24 hours. Speaking of the weather, though, I do have some unfortunate news to deliver to everyone, and that is that Dr. DeSalvo is unfortunately unable to make it today because she is under the weather, so unable to fly. But we are very fortunate that we do have one of our own, a hospitalist, who's a leader in the American healthcare world today, to really come and speak to us about the role of hospitalists in today's healthcare environment. Vice Admiral Vivek Murthy is a trained hospitalist, became the 19th United States Surgeon General in December of 2014. As America's doctor, Dr. Murthy communicates the best available scientific information to the public regarding ways to improve personal and public health. Dr. Murthy has devoted himself to improving public health through the lens of service, clinical care, research, education, and entrepreneurship. As a clinician and an educator, Dr. Murthy has trained hundreds of residents, medical students, and cared for thousands of patients, which he considers his greatest privilege. His entrepreneurial spirit has led him to co-found Visions, an HIV/AIDS education program in India and the US, which he's led for the past 8 years. Additionally, he co-founded the Swasthya Project, which is a community health partnership in rural India focused on training women and to be healthcare providers and educators, reaching tens of thousands of rural residents. Dr. Murthy is also a research scientist with publications in journals such as JAMA and Science. In his role as Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy intends to focus his efforts on addressing the epidemics of obesity and tobacco-related disease, to reduce the stigma associated with mental illness, to improve vaccination rates, and to make prevention and health promotion a cornerstone of a healthy and strong America. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy.
Well, good morning, everyone. Wow, that was pretty lackluster. I'm going to try this one more time here. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Wow, okay, everyone's awake here. I got to say, I was so impressed to hear that there are nearly 4,000 people here for the SHM meeting. It's really quite impressive, and it's a testament to the extraordinary work that the leaders and the members of SHM have done to really build this movement in hospital medicine. Now, today, I know that we're here to celebrate a lot of things. We're here to celebrate 20 years of hospital medicine. And we're also here to celebrate the innovation and the leadership that so many of you have brought to hospital medicine. And as a result of that, millions of people have benefited. In the last 4 years alone, we know that hospital-acquired infections have dropped 17%, saving over 50,000 lives and $12 billion. And hospitalists played an important role in making that happen. So there's a lot to celebrate here tonight. Now, I must say on a personal note how much it means to me to be here as a hospitalist myself. And I was not somebody who ever thought he would be a hospitalist. In fact, I was just telling some of the folks backstage that when I was in medical school, I didn't even know what a hospitalist was. And I trained in a primary care program, thinking that I would be in outpatient care for my entire career. But I was grateful to have some wonderful mentors at Brigham and Women's Hospital where I trained, who helped me see that a hospitalist career could be a fulfilling one. And that's the step that I took. Now, initially, when I became a hospitalist, I thought it would be a temporary gig, something I did for a couple of years while I figured out what I really wanted to do in life. But as it turns out, I really loved what I did as a hospitalist. I loved teaching. I loved caring for patients. I loved being part of a tight-knit team that was our fellow hospitalists. And so I stumbled upon this job, and I'm so glad that I did. And I'll say that one of the things that I miss most as Surgeon General are those moments sitting by a patient's bedside, and also those moments, believe it or not, weekend rounding. Not because I like working weekends, but because, as many of you can probably relate, the camaraderie that you have with the other hospitalists who are there over the weekend can just be fantastic. And we all felt like we were a part of a team trying to take care of the whole hospital together. So today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you some of the experiences that I've had during this past year as Surgeon General. And I'd like to reflect on what they've helped me understand about the kind of future that we can create together. As Surgeon General, my job is to help people and communities understand how to improve their health. And my job is also to command the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, a wonderful group of officers, 6,700 officers in fact, who are stationed in 800 locations in the United States and all around the world. And these officers include doctors and nurses, dentists and physical therapists, pharmacists, veterinarians, and even public health engineers. I bet many of you didn't know that there was such a thing as public health engineers, but there are, and they're in the Corps. Now, these officers have dedicated their lives to improving public health around the world, and they are called upon, particularly during times of great need, when we have crises like we did with Ebola, with SARS, when we have natural disasters like earthquakes and tornadoes, during 9/11. These are all moments where our public health officers deployed and helped to respond to critical public health needs. And serving as the head of the Commission Corps is really one of the great privileges of this job. Now you might ask yourself, why am I telling you about what my job is? Well, there's a very good reason. Because as it turns out, while everyone recognizes the title Surgeon General, I've quickly realized that nobody has any idea what I actually do. Really none. So I find it important to explain up top. And just to give you a sense of this, the other day I was boarding a flight at the airport, and I was about to enter the plane. And I was in a line, and the woman in front of me turned around, and she saw me in uniform, and she said, "Oh, why don't you go ahead of me?" And I said, "No, ma'am, don't worry. I'm happy to wait. You can go first." And she looked at me and she said, "No, if you don't go first, who's going to fly the plane?" So there's a lot of confusion out there, and I'm here to clear it up. Now, over the last year, I've had the chance to travel around the country and meet with parents and children, with doctors and teachers, and with people in small towns and big cities alike, understanding their perspectives on health. And often when I travel, people tell me what concerns them. Parents often share with me that they're concerned that their neighborhoods aren't safe for their kids. They worry about violence. They worry about road safety. Others are worried that drugs, particularly the prescription opioid crisis, will steal the futures of their children and adults in their community. And still others worry that more and more people they know are developing diabetes, obesity, and heart disease earlier and earlier in life. Now, some communities have all of these concerns and then more. And one of those communities is one that I visited just a few weeks ago in Flint, Michigan. Now, many of you are aware of the crisis that's happening in Flint. And I went there because I wanted to understand how the community was being impacted by this terrible water crisis and what we could do to help. And like much of the country, I was also deeply saddened and really disturbed by the fact that in 2016, in the richest country in the world, that we have brothers and sisters here in America who can't trust the water that's coming out of their faucet. And that seems wrong. And it is wrong. In Flint, I spoke with healthcare providers, and I spoke with community organizations, and I went door to door to meet people and to talk to them in their homes, to see firsthand what they were going through. And one couple that I remember vividly I wanted to tell you about them. I sat in their living room with their 2 daughters, and I could feel the pain and the anger in their voice as they told me how horrified they were that they let their daughters drink contaminated water for 2 years. Now, to be clear, this wasn't their fault. They thought the water was okay. But they felt the way that most parents do, which is that their children are their most important responsibility, that caring for them was a sacred calling. And they found themselves asking themselves again and again, how could we do better by our children? Now, there's much work ahead in Flint. And that question, how can we do better by our children, will remain on the minds of parents in Flint for a long, long time to come. But what I hadn't expected to see in Flint was the fierce determination, strength, and pride of the residents. They were committing to rebuilding the town in which they were raised. And despite everything that had happened, they could still see the possibility of what Flint could be, and they wanted to fight for that. It turns out that Flint has a lot to teach the rest of the nation. The question that they are asking themselves is the one that we should be asking ourselves more broadly, which is, when it comes to health, how can we do better by our fellow Americans? Many of the conversations I had in Flint and around the country have convinced me that if we really want to safeguard the health of our nation, if we want people to be able to live up to their full potential, if we want them to be able to bounce back during times of adversity, then we have to think deeply about how to create a foundation for health that serves everyone in America. This is important because health is more than a set of lab values corrected. It's more than a set of illnesses deferred. Health is the key to opportunity. An essential element of the promise of America is that opportunity should be available to all who are willing to work for it. Put another way, health is intrinsically connected to the American dream. If we safeguard the health of our people, we bring opportunity and the American dream closer and closer within their grasp. Now, I believe that the foundation of a healthy life requires us to create a culture of prevention in America, a culture that is grounded in good nutrition and physical activity and in emotional well-being. I also believe an effective foundation for health must be inclusive and equitable, bringing the benefits of prevention and treatment to all people, regardless of where they live or the color of their skin. But perhaps most importantly today, I believe that hospitalists can and must be leaders in helping the nation build this foundation for health. There are 4 things that I believe we must do to build this foundation for health. 4 things that we need your help to do. First, we must find a way to create a culture where healthy is equated with happiness and with what people want. And that's not always what we have if we look at the situation right now. Right now, in fact, choosing healthy options is too often associated with pain, not with pleasure. Think about that old saying that many of us grew up with, that you just have to suck it up and eat your spinach. What does that really say about spinach? And think about how many people look at their gym routine as an onerous burden, something that they have to do to prevent a heart attack in 20 or 30 or 40 years. It's not very inspiring. And in fact, many people have even told me that the way that they figure out what to eat at a restaurant is they go to the menu, they look at all the stuff that has healthy before it, and they avoid that, figuring it won't taste so good. So we have a ways to go in rebranding health. And we have to shift the pursuit of health from being a source of pain to being a source of pleasure and power. The good news, though, is that this is possible. And in fact, I've had a chance to see programs that are doing just this. Some months ago, I was in Roanoke, Virginia, where I was visiting the Healthy Chefs program. And I heard about this program in a listening session that we were conducting in Roanoke. And what they're doing in this program is fascinating, but they're helping children rebuild a healthy relationship with fruits and vegetables. When the kids come into the program, they always ask them, what are your favorite foods? And almost always the kids list the big 3. You can probably guess what the big 3 are. Pizza, macaroni and cheese, and hot dogs. And you don't have to raise your hand, but my guess is those 3 items are in some of your lists too. And that's okay, because that's what many of these kids had been exposed to. But once they started getting exposed to fruits and vegetables, once they started working with those fruits and vegetables and making dishes in school, their preferences started changing. And when the program had reassessed their list periodically, they found that many times the big 3 were replaced by the dishes that the kids were tasting in school. And then the kids did something else amazing, which is that they went home and they asked their parents for these foods. And the parents then turned around and called the school, which was ready, with a list of where to buy the foods at affordable prices and with a list of recipes too. So just like this, one program is changing the relationship that children have to food, and it is also making healthy food a source of pleasure and a source of community around the dining table in families. Now, as hospitalists, many of us have realized the core elements of this story in our own work. We've realized that what can be most effective toward moving patients toward healthier behaviors is finding out what actually gives them joy. Because if we can connect health behaviors to the joy that people seek, we can find much greater motivation than the fear that we sometimes use in our messaging. Now, we can also bridge the pain and pleasure divide when it comes to health behaviors by connecting our patients with community programs that make physical activity and diet change enjoyable. And the good news here, too, is that there are programs like this, and I've seen them at the YMCA. The YMCA, for example, is making lifestyle change not only fun, but also social, and as a product of those two, sustainable for many people in the community. Now, in Iowa, they had an experience there where Mercy Medical Center, one of the hospitals, decided to co-locate with the YMCA because they realized the power that I'm speaking of with the YMCA. They realized that many of the doctors at Mercy Medical Center had patients who needed desperately to be engaged in lifestyle change, but nobody had the ability or the resources to support them in doing that at the hospital. The YMCA had proven programs that were doing that, and they were looking for a referral source. And that was a marriage that was just waiting to happen. So they co-located the YMCA and Mercy Medical Center, and now patients are benefiting greatly because there's a pipeline there that's taking patients in need and connecting them to resources. And guess who came up with that idea? Well, it was in fact 2 doctors at Mercy Medical Center who happened to be on the board of the YMCA. 2 doctors who understood the need, that the needs of their patients couldn't solely be fulfilled by the resources they had in the hospital, and they looked out into the community. So making the pursuit of health appealing will be essential for us to create better health in America. The second point that's become more clear to me is that we can't change health behaviors in a sustainable way unless we change the environment in which we live. Too many people live in neighborhoods where physical activity is too difficult because of violence or because of road safety concerns. Many children spend much of their lives surrounded by junk food in school, in vending machines, and in advertisements that they see on TV. And too many families find that eating fruits and vegetables sounds like a good idea, but is hard to do practically because fruits and vegetables aren't accessible or they're too expensive in their neighborhoods. In Flint, for example, for a city of nearly 90,000 people, there isn't one single full-service grocery store. Not one. Now, creating an environment that supports health means pushing back against forces that advertise junk food to our kids. It means speaking up for healthy food in our hospital cafeterias and our neighborhoods. And it means convincing our city councils that making neighborhoods safer and more walkable is a public health priority. And some cities have been able to do this. In West Wabasso, Florida, they realized that despite all the challenges they had with a substantial portion of their residents living at or below the poverty line, that they needed to invest in health. And they did it by improving street lighting, by building sidewalks, by building bike lanes, and by cleaning up vacant lots and transforming them into parks. And what they found was that within 2 years of doing that, 95% of the residents reported that they had increased their level of physical activity. 95%. And when asked why, the most commonly cited reason was the improved walkability of their communities. So environment can make a big difference. And hospitalists can play an important role in changing the environment in our communities. And you can do this by using your voices to call for change. And if you think about it, who has more credibility than hospitalists do when dealing with the consequences of unhealthy environments? Now, we can call for these kind of changes in our hospitals when it comes to food and walkability. We can call for these changes in our schools and in our communities. And we can do so by calling our elected leaders and by sharing with the media what our experiences are and what our perspectives are. Now, you might say, hold on a minute. Who really wants to hear from me? You might think to yourself, well, I don't have any real power. But let me tell you this. You have far more power than you realize. And I say this not because it sounds good. I say it because for years before I served as Surgeon General, I worked to bring together doctors around the country to discover the power that they had, the power of their voice, and their ability to create change at a local, state, and federal level. I spoke with a member of Congress once who told me that he receives a lot of constituent calls each and every day. But he said if they receive a call from a doctor, that's listed as a notable event. If they receive 10 calls from doctors on one day, that's a full-blown crisis. And that goes to show how infrequently they hear from doctors, how infrequently they hear from nurses. But they need to hear from you because you have ideas, you have experience, and you have perspectives that policymakers need to hear. Now, the third point that I have come to believe even more deeply than before is that in order to improve health, we cannot focus solely on the body, but we also have to focus on the mind and the spirit. So many of the conversations that I've had with families have been about the costs of depression and anxiety. I'm sure that many of your experiences have been similar when you consider the patients that you've cared for. It takes on average 10 years to diagnose a mental illness after symptoms begin. And oftentimes these symptoms start during childhood. And alarming numbers of people, including doctors, experience high levels of stress from isolation, from family strife, and from the all too common experience of discrimination. Now, I learned early in my intern year that you could put all the effort in the world into developing the best blood pressure regimen for a patient, into figuring out the best insulin dosage and timing for them. But if they were dealing with severe untreated mental illness, if their level of emotional well-being was low, then their likelihood of following up on your recommendations and going to follow-up appointments was far, far lower. And all of you know this. You've seen this in your own practice. Now, we have to do better when it comes to identifying mental illness early and connecting people with the help they need. But we also have to focus on improving emotional well-being for everyone. Because emotional well-being is not just the absence of mental illness. Emotional well-being is a resource that exists within each of us that we can strengthen, that we can cultivate, and that allows us to reach ever closer to our true potential. And the good news here, too, is there are programs that are succeeding on improving emotional well-being in America. In Chicago, the Becoming a Man program, which brings at-risk youth together once a week to enjoy some mentorship, social connection, and to talk about strategies for managing conflict. This program, in a randomized clinical trial, was shown to reduce violence-related arrests by 44% in 1 year. 44%. And similarly, in San Francisco, at Visitation Valley Middle School, there a meditation-based emotional well-being program in 1 year alone has succeeded in reducing suspensions by 45%, reducing teacher absenteeism by 30%, improving children's sleep and anxiety scores, and improving their grade point averages and test scores. So emotional well-being is critical for us to recognize in our patients. But I also want to say this, it's also equally as important for us as physicians too. Because at a time where far too many of our colleagues in medicine are burning out, at a time when we are losing far too many colleagues to suicide, our profession of healers must make it a priority to learn about how we can strengthen our own emotional well-being and how we can then help to heal others, taking care of our own emotional well-being, and leading professional wellness programs, as many of you are doing, in fact, this must be part of the culture that we build in medicine. And finally, the fourth thing that we must do to build a foundation for health in America is we must cultivate our ability to give and receive kindness. Now, kindness is not just a virtue. It's a source of healing. And this is not something that I was taught in medical school. It's not something that was on the boards. It was something, though, that I learned by caring for patients, by understanding the growing literature on the impact of meaning and happiness on health, and by having countless conversations with adults and children in America and abroad. Too often our culture, our media, and our politics teach us that expressions of kindness, whether they be forgiveness, compassion, or generosity, are signs of weakness. But there's nothing weak about kindness. Some of the most successful people in our nation's history, including some of our presidents, trace their strength and their success back to the kindness of a parent, a friend, or a teacher. The kindness of Mother Teresa moved governments, transformed institutions, and inspired millions of people all over the world. And it was the kindness of boat captains on the Hudson River in New York, who ferried nearly 500,000 people to safety during 9/11, that inspired millions of people during one of our nation's darkest hours. Kindness, it turns out, may be one of the greatest sources of strength that we have. Now, as physicians who specialize in caring for complete strangers in some of their most frightening and vulnerable moments, kindness is the bedrock of how we build trusting and therapeutic relationships. So the question is, can we help our children and our young people see kindness as a source of strength, not weakness? Can we help create a culture of kindness in our hospitals and in our communities? And can we be role models for kindness in how we treat others, especially those with whom we differ in viewpoint or background? These 4 steps that I laid out, these can help us build a foundation for health in America, a foundation that will serve our patients and that will serve our country. And at a time where chronic illness and healthcare costs have skyrocketed, the urgency really couldn't be greater. In our next 20 years as a specialty in hospital medicine, how can we be a force that helps build this foundation for health? How can we strike at the root causes of illness by shifting our country toward a culture of prevention? As our hospitalist movement grows, as I'm sure that it will, and as we think about the future of medicine, I'd ask you to consider 3 questions when you go home. First, can hospitalists leverage their leadership in the hospital to not only improve systems, but to also create a culture that supports healing and health? Second, can hospitalists be as powerful a force for change outside the hospital as they are inside the hospital, recognizing that critical drivers of illness, like nutrition and safety and physical activity, are most often grounded in the community rather than in the clinic? And third, as people who often mentor trainees and younger physicians, can we inspire the next generation of physicians with a broader vision of medicine, one where physicians' sacred duty is to safeguard the health of their community by treating illness, but also by preventing it? Health is the key to opportunity, and everyone in America should have a strong foundation for health. It's up to us collectively to ensure that this is a promise of America that is kept for each and every person. This is important really not just for our patients that we know, not just for our family and friends, but it's so important for the millions of people that we don't see every day, the millions of brothers and sisters in America to whom we are bound by an unspoken but powerful kinship. And in the end, this may be, in fact, the reminder that we need most, that we are connected to each other and that we are responsible for each other. My grandfather understood this lesson nearly half a century ago. He was a small farmer in a poor village in India. When my father was 10 years old, his mother died, and my grandfather was left to raise 6 children on his own. And he struggled because they didn't have a lot of money in the family. My father would often tell me that at night, when they cooked dinner, that they would take the dal, the grain, and they would boil it, and they would keep adding water more and more and more to dilute it until there was enough volume to fill each child's bowl. But despite not having enough to eat, my grandfather would spend 1 month each year traveling around the village to raise money to build a youth hostel so students could study. And people in the village used to come up to him and say, "You are so irresponsible. Your family can't even eat. You haven't even fulfilled your responsibility, and yet you're spending time going out to raise money for other causes. Where are your priorities?" And he would think about this, and he would often just reply to them quietly, "Well, those children are our children too. Those people are our people too." We need a renewed commitment to strengthen our country, child by child, family by family, neighborhood by neighborhood. We need to restore a sense of optimism to our country, a sense of optimism that inspires people to choose possibility over pessimism. And we need to ensure that health is no longer a barrier that puts the dreams of a child beyond their reach for no fault of their own. That's our charge. That's our collective responsibility. And that's the call to which we need SHM and hospitalists around the country to respond. Because in the end, I've always believed that the world gets better when people choose to come together and make it so. And I really believe that those people must be us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy. Your words are very inspiring. It really resonated with me and really brought home the old adage of to really think globally but act locally, to hear some of the stories that you've been able to tell in terms of things that are going on a local level to really change the health of those communities. So very inspiring. Thank you. So Dr. Murthy has been gracious enough to give us a few extra minutes today to allow us to ask a few questions, particularly around the Surgeon General's perspective on various healthcare issues. So as SHM's president, I'm going to act as your ambassador today and sort of relate some of these questions to Dr. Murthy as we go forward. So the first question that we have, Dr. Murthy, is how do you see hospitalists playing a role in population health and preventive medicine? And specifically, are there initiatives that you plan to propose where hospitalists will play a key role?
Well, that's a great question. And as I referenced earlier in this speech, I believe strongly that hospitalists have a powerful role that they can play in helping to create a culture of prevention in America. And we can do this actually just by starting with our hospitals. I've always believed that our hospitals should be pictures of health in what they serve in terms of food and the activity that they promote, and in the emotional well-being that they support. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, we know that we probably have room for improvement in many of our hospitals. And the question is, who's going to transform our hospitals into pictures of health that can not only support the people who work there, but can inspire the patients and their family members who come through? And that's a place where I think hospitals can play an important role. The second thing that I think hospitalists can do is to try to influence the world outside the hospital by sharing their ideas and their views with decision makers, particularly with elected leaders. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I am often struck by how infrequently elected leaders hear from doctors. I'm also struck by how many good ideas I hear from doctors about how we can improve the system. But the place where we in particular need the feedback of doctors and their participation in the conversation is around both changes in the delivery system within the hospital, but also changes in the community that can support prevention. You know, many people think of a sidewalk, for example, as just a piece of infrastructure. They don't think about a sidewalk as a public health intervention. People don't think about grocery stores as a public health intervention. People don't think about parks as a public health intervention. But the truth is, all of these elements of the built environment can have a profound impact on health. The question is, who's going to advocate for them? And I think that those should be hospitalists, because I believe that it doesn't mean that hospitalists alone have to do this. We can team up with primary care physicians, with specialists, and work together in the House of Medicine to advocate for the changes that our patients need. But you have extraordinary credibility, like in the eyes of many decision makers at a local, state, and national level, because of the extraordinary work that you're doing each and every day, because you are on the front lines. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm often struck by the gap between how powerful people feel clinicians are and how powerless many clinicians feel. And one of my hopes is that as we close that gap, as physicians and nurses and others who are in clinical care step up and claim the power that they have by virtue of their experience, that we can start to move our country closer to a culture of prevention.
Great, thank you. You alluded to in some of your remarks the opioid misuse, abuse crisis that's currently going on. Talk to us a little bit about how you see hospitalists in the hospital, in the emergency department, potentially playing a role in addressing that crisis.
Well, I'm so glad you brought this up. The prescription opioid crisis is one of our top priorities in my office for 2016. And I just want to say at the outset that as we build and roll out our initiative here, that we want to work with SHM and with all of you, because I believe firmly, and many people in the Obama administration believe this as well, that physicians can be a powerful force for tackling this epidemic. You know, many times when we think about diabetes and heart disease and other conditions, we think, well, there are so many complex drivers of disease, and sure, we can affect them, but you know, it's going to take a lot of work, it's going to be tough. But what's interesting to me about the prescription opioid epidemic is that we have a much more direct path to addressing that epidemic, and that's through our prescribing practices. Because contrary to the opinion of some, when you look at the facts, it turns out that the majority of people who are misusing prescription opioids are not buying their supply off the street, but they're getting them from legally prescribed medications, either that are coming to them directly or that they're getting from a friend or family member. And this means that if we shift and change our prescribing practices, that we can make a major dent on the epidemic. Now, there are a few key things I think we have to do as physicians. I think one is we have to have conversations with our patients about the benefits, but also the risks of prescription opioids. And I'll tell you that that wasn't always something that I was trained to do when I was in medical school and in residency. And I know that's not true it's also true for many physicians who've trained across the country, that when they look back on their prescription opioid education, they feel like there were many holes in them. I had another physician who was telling me just the other day, in fact, that when she was trained, she was taught that if there's real pain present, that opioids won't be addictive. And so it's okay to prescribe them, even for prolonged periods of time, so long as the pain is real. Now, we know that that's not quite the case. In fact, it's not at all the case. But there have been gaps in our training over time. So one of the things that we can do is certainly talk to patients about the risks and the benefits. The second thing we can do is to look for alternatives to opioids, recognizing that there are other things that we can do to treat pain that include physical therapy, that include non-opioid-based medications, and a range of other interventions. And the third thing we can do is if we have to prescribe opioids, we can prescribe them for the shortest possible duration at the lowest possible dose. There are other tools that are being developed for physicians as well. Many states have what are called PDMPs, which many of you may be familiar with, prescription drug monitoring programs, which allow you to see whether a patient has received opiate medications at other facilities. Now, to be completely honest, some of these platforms need more work. Some of them need to be more current. Many of them need to be more integrated into the electronic health record. So there's work to be done there, but those platforms are a starting point for how we can understand whether or not the people we're prescribing medicines to are higher risk or lower risk. So there are a range of things that we as physicians can do. And one of the primary goal of our initiative that we're developing from my office will be to work directly with physicians, with NPs, with PAs, and with dentists who comprise the bulk of prescribers to see how we can take ownership of this problem and how we can build a movement in medicine to reduce and to reverse the opioid epidemic.
Thank you. So the other thing you mentioned in your remarks was some comments around improving the mental health. So how does the improvement or early recognition of mental health impact, in your mind, the opioid crisis and potentially cross over with managing prescription opioid drugs?
Well, it's a great question, and there is an important link here, which is opioids treat pain. Sometimes physical pain, sometimes mental and psychological pain. And it's important for us to assess where people are in terms of their emotional well-being and their mental health before we prescribe opioids, and even during the duration of treatment. Now, right now we have a lot of challenges when it comes to assessing mental health and getting people treated. Mental health isn't always high on people's agenda, especially in the hospital when people are coming in with acute infections or MIs or severe pneumonias. But it ends up impacting so much of what we do. So one of the things that we certainly need to do more of is to have a closer integration between the mental health services that we have, which we frankly need more of, and the traditional medical services that we provide. I was privileged when I was a hospitalist to practice at a hospital that had a lot of resources, relatively speaking. And even at our hospital, though, it was not always easy to get mental health follow-up and integrated care for our patients. And we saw the consequences of that time and time again. So part of what we need to do is to assess where patients are before we prescribe opioids. But the other thing that we have to do is, as a community, as a country, is to change our perception of mental illness. Because sadly, there's still a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. And nearly half the people who have diagnosed mental illness don't get treatment. And a big reason why is that they are fearful of coming forward and admitting that they may suffer from mental illness. So how does that change? Well, it changes when people start talking more about it. It changes when physicians bring it up more in a conversation. It changes when people in the community, faith leaders, and other trusted leaders begin conversations about mental illness and encourage people to come forward. I'm particularly interested in these kind of partnerships that we can build with the community. Sometimes people will say to me, well, the plate of our healthcare providers is really full right now. And I think many of you probably feel that. I certainly felt it when I was practicing. And the question is, how can we add even more to their plate? How can we tell people to go out in the community and do X, Y, and Z, make phone calls to their elected leaders, do all of these things? Well, we have to support each other in doing this, recognizing that those kind of collaborations can, in the medium and long term, actually help reduce our workload. What the physicians at Mercy Medical Center found, especially in the early days, and I remember talking to the YMCA about this collaboration a lot, is they found that the effort spent in building that collaboration with the Y paid off, because they didn't have to worry as much about the patients who needed a lifestyle change. They didn't have to keep seeing them week after week to ensure that they were doing what they were doing. They didn't have to endure nearly as much frustration. They knew that there were folks who had that, who had the programs that were proven to work, and they were plugged into them. So that's why I think that these kind of collaborations are so important when it comes to not just mental health, but many of the other challenges that we've been discussing.
Great. Final question is, talk to us a little bit about what you see in your near-term future in terms of initiatives that you might propose and those particularly that hospitalists may play a key role in delivering.
Well, quick question. Well, I'll tell you about some of the initiatives we have planned for 2016. I mentioned the Prescription Opiate Initiative, which will be rolling out later this year, which will be focused primarily on a partnership with the medical community. The second initiative that we'll be working on is around e-cigarettes. Now, many of you might be, I'm sure, have patients or know people who use e-cigarettes. And actually, just out of curiosity, how many of you have encountered people who use e-cigarettes? Okay, so nearly everyone. The prevalence of e-cigarettes can be contrasted with the really lack of awareness that most of the public has about whether they're good or bad, whether there are indications for it or not, and about whether, if any, there may be harmful effects from e-cigarettes. And I found this confusion really everywhere. I was in Seattle at a listening session, and I encountered a teacher who told me that her kids in class can't chew gum in school, they can't smoke in school, but they're smoking e-cigarettes in school, in the classroom. And when I asked her why, she said, well, the county doesn't really know what to do with e-cigarettes, so they don't have a policy on it, so we don't have a policy on it in the school, and we're just kind of hoping that somebody will tell us what to do. And she was not a unique example. She's not an outlier, but there are many people around the country who are confused about this. I was at the US Conference of Mayors a couple of weeks ago, and one of the mayors just raised her hand and she said, what on earth are we supposed to do about these e-cigarettes? Are they good? Are they bad? Should we ban them? Should we allow them? What are we supposed to do? And many of the other mayors in the room nodded their heads also, wondering what we should do. So there's a lot of confusion here, and that's why in 2016, we're making education on e-cigarettes and a public campaign around that one of our priorities. In the fall of this year, the third thing we'll be doing is releasing the first ever Surgeon General's report on substance use and addiction. Now, some of you may think, this has been a problem for a long time. How come there's never been a Surgeon General's report on it? Well, that was one of the things I wondered, actually, when I began. And it turns out it's long overdue. And the reason that we're putting this out is partly to change cultural perceptions of addiction, to shift how people think about addiction from a moral failing to seeing it as a chronic illness that deserves to be treated with urgency and with compassion and with skill. But we're also doing this report because we want to pull together the best available scientific data on how to prevent and treat illness and how to help people stay in recovery. And so those are some key initiatives. The last initiative in 2016 that I'll mention, and they're always smaller initiatives, but this is a big focus area for us, will be the emotional well-being piece. I feel increasingly convinced that cultivating emotional well-being could be one of the most powerful things that we do for overall health in America. And I'll tell you this, I didn't actually necessarily think this when I began as Surgeon General, but it's something that I've come to believe through the conversations that I've had, through the programs that I've visited, and through just what I've seen in communities and in families. I've seen, for example, that people recognize that nutrition is important. People recognize the importance of physical activity. But people tend to look at emotional well-being as something that happens to you. That if all the stars align, that hopefully you can be happy and emotionally well. They don't necessarily see it as something that we can proactively cultivate. But what's fascinating is that there is a growing body of science around this that tells us that there are ways to cultivate emotional well-being, and that in turn can have a direct impact on health, particularly for some of the most underserved communities. So these are some of the areas that we'll be focused on in 2016. There'll be countless others that we plug into over time, as we always do. But we'd certainly love to work with and to partner with you in any or all of these areas.
Dr. Murthy, I can't thank you enough on behalf of our organization for your time today. Your inspiring words, given us all a lot to think about, and certainly some food for thought to go home and really impact our local communities. So greatly appreciate you being here today and sharing some of that insight with us. Thank you. So again, thank Dr. Murthy for being here with us. I would just like to let everybody know the exhibit hall is open until about 10:35. Couple of reminders, please be sure to download the SHM meeting app, HM16 at hand, for the most up-to-date information, maps, and to be able to guide your HM experience. I thank you all for your time this morning and look forward to a great meeting with all of you.